Sean Diddy Combs will not get out of jail on bail. A federal judge has denied his latest request. In the decision, the judge said prosecutors provided clear and convincing evidence to support a risk of witness tampering.
Imagine thinking you're about to walk free, only to have the judge shut it all down. Diddy thought he had it in the bag, but when the judge rejected his bail request, he lost it. Sean Diddy Combs will remain in prison as he waits for his trial, with a federal judge denying his $50 million bail bid. Despite multiple attempts by his defense team to secure his release from the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, the judge overseeing his sex trafficking case ruled he'll stay behind bars. We've got all the latest updates for you. Sean Diddy Combs won't be spending Thanksgiving with his family this year. The music mogul, who has been behind bars at the Metropolitan Detention Center since his September arrest on federal sex crime charges, has just been denied bail once again. This decision, made by Judge Arun Subramanian, means Diddy will remain in jail for the foreseeable future. Last week, a hearing took place where both the prosecution and defense presented their arguments over whether Diddy should be granted bail. Now we've got the judge's official ruling. The order came down just before Thanksgiving, late on Wednesday, and it reads, "The court has evaluated each of the factors it must consider under the relevant law. 1. Nature and circumstances of the offense charged. 2. Weight of the evidence against the person. 3. History and characteristics of the person. And 4. Nature and seriousness of the danger that would be posed by the person's release." The ruling also mentions that Judge Subramanian has reviewed all the information submitted by both the defense and the government throughout all 3 bail hearings. As a reminder, Diddy had previously been denied bail by both a magistrate judge and a district court judge. In his decision, Judge Subramanian states, "The court finds that the government has shown by clear and convincing evidence, the standard required, that no condition or combination of conditions will reasonably assure the safety of the community." He goes on to outline the reasons for this conclusion, which could keep Diddy behind bars for a while longer. Judge Subramanian starts by outlining the seriousness of the charges against Sean Diddy Combs. In his ruling, he notes, "The indictment charges Combs with serious and violent crimes." As a reminder, Combs faces multiple charges, including racketeering, conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transportation to engage in prostitution. The judge then highlights the details in the indictment, which describe a pattern of abuse and coercion. According to Subramanian, the charges allege that for decades, Combs used threats and manipulation to control women and others around him to satisfy his sexual desires, protect his public image, and cover up his actions. The indictment claims that Combs relied on his vast business empire, using its resources and influence to create a criminal enterprise involved in various illegal activities. The ruling goes on to cite specific evidence presented by the government. One key piece is a 2016 videotape showing Combs allegedly beating his ex-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura in a hotel hallway. This video, which was released by CNN several months ago, has become a significant piece of evidence in the case. It's important to note that Ventura was the one who filed a lawsuit against Combs in November 2023, setting off a chain of events that led to the current criminal charges and multiple lawsuits against him. Judge Subramanian doesn't just rely on the 2016 video to highlight Combs's history of violence. He also points to text messages between Combs and what he identifies as Victim 1, who is believed to be Cassandra Ventura. In these texts, Ventura describes the aftermath of the hotel incident, saying, "I have a black eye and a fat lip. You are sick for thinking it's okay to do what you've done. I still have crazy bruising from there." The judge also cites evidence that suggests a serious risk of witness tampering. One key example is Combs's communications with Witness 1, who was subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury in June 2024 and did so in July. Combs, who had legal representation at the time, has offered explanations for some of these communications, but there are several instances they couldn't account for. Notably, Combs continued to reach out to this witness after their grand jury testimony with texts and calls that he failed to adequately explain. Even more troubling is the discovery of deleted messages between Combs and this witness. The judge points out that while contacting a witness before their grand jury testimony could raise concerns, attempting to reach out after the fact is a much more serious issue, especially when it involves deleting messages. Judge Subramanian also points to evidence suggesting that Combs violated Bureau of Prisons regulations during his pre-trial detention in an effort to obscure his communications with third parties. As discussed previously, Combs was allegedly using other inmates' PAC numbers to make phone calls, a private messaging service to reach out to people, and even engaging in three-way phone calls. The concern was that he wasn't just breaking the rules, he was possibly trying to contact potential witnesses in the case or even influence potential jurors through social media. What's notable here is that Judge Subramanian states, "The court makes no determination that the content of communications through these channels was improper." This is an interesting distinction because, during the hearing, the judge discussed whether Combs's social media activity or posts through others would constitute an issue. The judge clarifies that he's not focusing on the content of the messages themselves, but the fact that Combs was deliberately ignoring the rules is what's problematic. He writes, however, his willingness to skirt BOP rules in a way that would make it more difficult for his communications to be monitored is strong evidence that the court cannot be reasonably assured as to the sufficiency of any conditions of release, especially given that they occurred when Combs was seeking bail and when he knew the government's concerns about witness tampering and obstruction were front and center. This is a serious red flag. The fact that Combs was trying to hide his communications while under investigation for obstruction, and with the government actively looking into his behavior, is not a good look. Another reason the court seemed hesitant about releasing Sean Combs was the issue of trust in his proposed bail conditions. During the hearing, Combs's attorneys argued that he could be trusted to comply with release terms, pointing out that he had an apartment in New York and would have private security. However, Judge Subramanian expressed doubts about relying on Combs or his employees to ensure those conditions were met. The judge wrote, "The court doubts the sufficiency of any conditions that place trust in Combs and individuals in his employ, like a private security detail, to follow those conditions." This strongly suggests that the judge was swayed by the prosecution's argument that his private security team could potentially be influenced or manipulated. There was also an interesting back and forth at the beginning of the hearing regarding some discrepancies in the case. Judge Subramanian pressed Combs' attorneys about materials that were photographed from his jail cell. The defense argued that this was a violation of attorney-client privilege, claiming that some of the photographed materials were protected by confidentiality. We'll dive into this point in more detail shortly, but it's clear that the judge took these concerns seriously when considering Combs's release. The defense argued that several legal pads found in Sean Combs's cell were marked legal, suggesting they contained privileged information. However, Judge Subramanian pointed out a discrepancy. He wrote, "The court further notes that it had held an emergency hearing to address the government's use of notes on legal pads recovered from Combs' bunk. At that hearing, defense counsel advised that all these legal pads say legal. Yes, they're marked as legal. After the hearing, the court inquired why, in light of counsel's representation, that the notes at issue were on legal pads clearly marked legal, photographs taken during the sweep show, no such labels. The judge continued, "Defense counsel admitted that, as of the day of the search, legal wasn't written on every legal pad, and they weren't sure whether the pad presented to the court had legal on it at the time of the sweep." The judge then remarked, "The circumstances of this incident and the misrepresentation made at the hearing, where Combs was present, bear on whether the court can be reasonably assured that any conditions it imposes will be followed, or whether, through inadvertence or active subversion, they will be broken and the community's safety threatened. It almost seems like the judge was signaling that the defense couldn't be trusted. Finally, Judge Subramanian distinguished Combs's case from that of Mike Jeffries, the former CEO of Abadi and Fit, who was arrested on similar sex trafficking charges in New York. Although both cases involve sex trafficking, Judge Subramanian noted the difference in the level of threat posed by each defendant. He cited the comparison in United States versus Jeff. While the government raised danger, its principal concern with respect to defendant Mike Jeff was flight. He had no criminal history. The alleged criminal conduct, which did not involve the kind of violence or RICO allegations made here about nearly a decade ago, and Jeff was 80 years old. This distinction highlighted the unique and more serious nature of Combs' case. In the end, Judge Subramanian denied Sean Combs's bail, and it looks like the only remaining option for him is to appeal the decision to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Combs's team had initially filed an appeal, but they decided to pause it and return to Judge Subramanian for further consideration. With the ruling now against them, the appeal process is back on the table. We previously did a full breakdown of last week's hearing, where both sides presented their arguments, so let's revisit that discussion. It's shaping up to be a very interesting week in the ongoing legal saga of Sean Diddy Combs. Just a few days ago, it seemed almost impossible that he would be released in time for Thanksgiving, but after the recent bail hearing in front of Judge Arun Subramanian, it feels a lot more likely. Let me explain why. Sean Combs has been held at the Metropolitan Detention Center, MDC, in Brooklyn since his arrest in September. He's facing serious charges. Specifically, he's accused of using force, threats, and coercion to manipulate women into engaging in sexual acts, some of which involved male sex workers, referred to as the freak-offs he allegedly orchestrated. Combs is also accused of running a criminal enterprise involved in various illegal activities, including kidnapping, arson, and violence. So far, 2 judges, a district court judge and a magistrate judge, have both denied Combs bail, agreeing with the prosecution's stance that he poses a danger to society. They highlighted the severity of the charges, his wealth and resources as a potential flight risk, and his attempts at witness tampering. Despite the defense presenting a comprehensive bail package, offering a $50 million bond, home confinement, restricted phone and internet use, 24/7 private security, and strict visitation limits, the judges ruled that these conditions were insufficient to mitigate the risks. It's a bail package of a scale that, frankly, is unprecedented in these types of cases. Heading into the Friday hearing before Judge Arun Subramanian, the latest judge assigned to the case, prosecutors were prepared with fresh arguments and evidence. This was particularly important since Judge Subramanian had not yet made a ruling on the bail issue. Prosecutors came armed with claims that Sean Combs had been violating Bureau of Prisons rules while in custody at the MDC, which could be a significant factor in deciding whether he should be granted bail. The argument was simple. If Combs can't follow the rules while incarcerated, why should the court believe he would adhere to conditions on the outside? On top of that, prosecutors alleged that Combs had been involved in unauthorized communications from jail. This included using other inmates' phone access codes to make calls, participating in 3-way phone calls on a monitored phone, and using a third-party text messaging service. They argued that he was using these methods to reach out to witnesses and potentially influence the jury pool in his case. One specific example cited by prosecutors was a social media campaign tied to Combs's birthday. His family had released a video of them celebrating and wishing him a happy birthday while he was on the phone from behind bars. Prosecutors believe the intent behind this video was to sway potential jurors, and they claim to have evidence backing up this theory. At the hearing on Friday, there were a number of issues brought up by both the prosecution and defense regarding the bail decision. However, the best way to understand everything that was discussed is to go through the details of what transpired in the courtroom. It's important to note, though, that there were no cameras in the courtroom, and electronic devices were limited, so the information we're working with comes from reports by those who were present. One of the first matters addressed at the hearing wasn't directly about bail, but rather an issue from a few days earlier. The defense had accused the prosecution of improperly photographing materials that may have been protected by attorney-client and work product privilege. This happened after a sweep for contraband at the MDC, where Combs is being held. The defense claims that the sweep was a targeted operation aimed at Combs, but prosecutors have denied any such intent, stating that they weren't involved in the search. However, an investigator from the Bureau of Prisons apparently took photos of notepads found in Combs's detention unit. Following a hearing on this matter, Judge Subramanian ruled that the prosecution must destroy 19 copies of photographs containing those pages. He also ruled that evidence gathered from those photos could not be used in the bail hearing. One key piece of evidence the prosecution hoped to use involved an alleged attempt by Combs to contact a witness, which they believed was shown in one of these photos. Judge Subramanian said he would need to decide at a later date whether a privilege violation had occurred. If it was determined that there had been a violation, it's unclear what the next steps would be. Combs's defense team has requested that the indictment be dismissed and that the prosecution's team from the Southern District of New York be recused from the case. It remains to be seen what the court will decide. Judge Subramanian raised an issue with the defense's argument. The defense had claimed that the legal pads found in Sean Combs' detention unit were clearly marked with the word legal on the top, indicating that these materials were privileged and off-limits to prosecutors. However, Judge Subramanian wasn't convinced. He pointed out that the defense had presented an intact legal pad with the word legal written on it, but when the photos of the pads taken during the sweep at the MDC were examined, there was no such writing. The judge asked, "Why is the word legal only on the pad after the fact?" This raised questions about the credibility of the defense's argument and didn't look good for Sean Combs or his legal team. During the hearing, one of Combs' attorneys, Mark Agnifilo, admitted he wasn't sure when the word legal had been written on the legal pads. He also conceded that not all the pads found during the sweep were marked with legal. In response, Judge Subramanian reportedly asked, "Did the pad you handed me say legal on it on November 1st?" Referring to the date of the sweep, Agnifilo's response was, "I'm not sure." This exchange prompted Judge Subramanian to caution the defense, warning, "Moving forward, make sure all of your representations to the court are true." It wasn't the most promising start for the defense. From there, the focus shifted to the bail arguments. Prosecutors were adamant that Sean Combs couldn't be trusted to adhere to the conditions of his pretrial release. They pointed to the allegations of misconduct while he was at the MDC, which they believed demonstrated a pattern of disregard for authority. Judge Subramanian's question about whether Combs could be trusted with 24/7 private security while under home confinement caught the attention of Assistant U.S. Attorney Kristi Slavic. When asked whether she would trust Combs's security team, Slavic responded by revealing that one member of the team was allegedly a co-conspirator in Combs' criminal activities. She claimed this person's phone had been confiscated and another security team member, a defense investigator, had been in contact with witnesses. In other words, the prosecution argued this so-called security team was essentially working for Combs. Later in the hearing, Mark Agnifilo, Combs' attorney, countered by proposing the use of an independent security team. He emphasized that Combs would be living under far more restrictive conditions at home than he currently experiences at the MDC. Judge Subramanian then turned to Assistant U.S. Attorney Kristi Slavic, asking, "You cite his wealth as an issue for pretrial release, so can't he use it?" This question highlighted a key point of contention. The prosecution argued that Combs's wealth, power, and resources made him a flight risk and allowed him to flout the rules, which is why they believed he shouldn't be granted bail. On the other hand, the defense argued that the only way to address these concerns was to create an expensive and highly restrictive bail package, which they hoped would alleviate those fears. Slavic, however, responded by saying that their push for continued detention wasn't based on Combs' wealth, but on his dangerousness, flight risk, and obstruction of justice. This prompted Judge Subramanian to ask her to clarify the obstruction argument further. Slavic pointed to previous allegations, but the judge pressed her, asking, "Is running a PR campaign from behind bars considered obstruction?" He was referring to the birthday message campaign Combs allegedly orchestrated. Prosecutor Slavic argued that Combs had allegedly been recorded in a phone call from the MDC saying something like, "I need only one." This, she claimed, suggested that Combs was trying to influence the jury, potentially impacting the integrity of the case. Slavic argued that this was part of his broader effort to obstruct the proceedings. The discussion then shifted to the allegations regarding Combs allegedly attempting to contact people inappropriately. Alexandra Shapiro, Combs' other attorney, pointed out that this case was different from others where defendants told people to lie, drawing a clear distinction between those situations and Combs' actions. She also argued that Combs had a First Amendment right to defend himself publicly, especially in the face of negative media coverage. Judge Subramanian, however, questioned why Combs couldn't do this through his lawyers instead of reaching out through third parties. Shapiro responded that while they were happy to do so, it wasn't their role to manage Combs's personal communications in that way. She also denied that Combs had obstructed justice by contacting victims or witnesses, assuring the judge that Combs would follow his lawyer's advice and avoid doing anything they told him not to do. The hearing reached what was arguably its most pivotal moment when Judge Subramanian asked about the specifics of where Sean Combs would serve his home confinement. Mark Agnifilo, Combs's attorney, responded that it would be in Miami, though there would be a dock on the property, but no boat. The judge didn't seem satisfied with that, replying, "That's not going to work." Where in New York could he stay? Agnifilo then suggested an apartment on the Upper East Side in New York, 3 bedrooms, and explained that there would be 2 security guards, one on the ground floor. There would be no access to phones or the internet, except for calls with his legal team, and Combs would be prohibited from contacting any potential witnesses in the case. This could be a sign that Judge Subramanian was considering granting Combs home confinement as part of a potential pretrial release. However, Judge Subramanian also heard from pretrial services, the office responsible for ensuring that federal defendants appear in court and don't pose a threat to the community while out on bail. The pretrial services representative sided with the prosecution, arguing that the proposed bail conditions were insufficient. That said, the representative acknowledged that they weren't aware of any cases where private security guards had been used as part of bail conditions, marking this as a unique situation. After hearing all sides, the judge announced that he would make a decision on the bail situation promptly, likely the following week. He requested that both the prosecution and the defense submit letters to the court by Monday at noon to address a key issue. What, if anything, Combs could say about his own case at this stage? Those letters were quickly submitted. The defense, in their letter, pointed to the recent case of United States versus Donald Trump, arguing that Combs, like Trump, was a criminal defendant, presumed innocent, and therefore had a greater constitutional right to speak out about the prosecution and the criminal trial process. They argued that, just as in Trump's case, Combs should be allowed more leeway to criticize the legal proceedings and the effort to strip him of his liberty. In their argument, the defense reiterated that Sean Combs's ability to speak was protected under the First Amendment, particularly his right to free speech. Alexandra Shapiro, one of Combs's attorneys, pointed to several court cases in her letter to back up her position. However, she noted that none of these cases were even remotely similar to the issues at hand. The defense argued that Combs' public statements didn't fall into categories that would harm witness testimony or compromise the integrity of the case. They made it clear that Combs wasn't attempting to undermine the prosecution's case, discredit witnesses, or influence the media with evidence. There were no efforts to release court-ordered discovery or obstruct the legal process in the way that courts typically define obstruction. Shapiro further emphasized that the government was advocating for a standard where Combs's reputation could be attacked by the press, civil plaintiffs, and the government itself, but Combs wouldn't be allowed to defend himself or influence public opinion in return. She argued that this wasn't the law, making a pointed reference to the numerous lawsuits Combs was facing at the time. The defense firmly stated that the prosecution's examples were not valid reasons to keep Combs in jail, and they should not be used as justification to deny him bail. On the other hand, the prosecution wasted no time making their stance clear in their letter. They argued that Combs' history of obstructive behavior was an ongoing issue, deeply linked to his long pattern of violent conduct. They said that when considering both his obstruction and violent behavior, the risks of allowing him bail became obvious. The prosecution maintained that the bail package presented by Combs's defense team failed to sufficiently ensure the safety of the community or mitigate the risk of him fleeing. They concluded by asserting that, based on the defendant's continuous efforts to obstruct the case, his renewed bail application should be denied outright. Judge Subramanian's decision to not immediately deny Sean Combs's request for bail, unlike the previous two judges, signals that there's a possibility Combs could be granted bail. The judge has even entertained the idea of what home confinement might look like for him, which means that, for now, it's still on the table. However, it's important to note that if Combs is released and violates any of the conditions set for his bail, he will be sent straight back to the Metropolitan Detention Center. And unless something extraordinary happens, it's unlikely he'd get another opportunity to seek bail again. So, if Combs is released, he will have to be on his best behavior to avoid further complications. That being said, the government still has the option to file obstruction charges against Combs, potentially stemming from his actions in the MDC. They could even bring additional charges through a superseding indictment based on what they claim he did while in custody. Remember, the government is currently submitting evidence to a grand jury in New York, which could lead to further legal action. Even if no new charges are filed, the government could still use this evidence to strengthen their racketeering case against him. If Combs is released and subsequently violates his bail conditions, additional charges could be filed at that time. If Judge Subramanian ultimately denies Combs' bail request, Combs would have one final chance to appeal the decision to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. His legal team had previously submitted a brief to support the bail request with this higher court, but they had asked the court to pause a decision until after they had petitioned Judge Subramanian. In the end, despite the legal back and forth, Sean Combs was officially denied bail for the third time. That's all the latest updates we have for now. Thanks for joining us, and as always, please subscribe to our channel. We'll speak to you next time.